We have seen wrestlers revert back to their old characters or old gimmicks, and there can be a few reasons why this happens. Sometimes it's because a new gimmick wasn't working out, sometimes it's because their new place of employment didn't secure the rights to use certain trademarks, sometimes it's just for the sake of nostalgia and to get an easy pop, or it can even be due to more nefarious reasons, such as a promoter wanting to punish or embarrass someone on the roster, preferring to make an example out of someone instead of, making money. Whatever the case, we'll be looking at a few wrestlers in today's video who reverted back to their old character or old gimmick, and we'll discuss the reasons behind these changes if a reason was made public. There's a lot of examples of this happening in pro wrestling over the years. This won't be an exhaustive list, but the comment section's always open for you to add more.
Yeah, they call him the natural. He's natural as can be.
During his tenure in the WWE, Dustin Runnels mainly portrayed the Goldust character, one of the most unique characters the company ever came up with, and a character that was so far away from the man behind the gimmick. Before the rise of Goldust within the WWF, Dustin was known as the Natural Dustin Rhodes. The Natural was introduced to audiences by his father, Dusty Rhodes, and Dustin would find success in WCW while working there from 1991 to mid-1995. He did compete in WCW for a few months before this in late 1988, but he left the company before working in Japan, Memphis, and a quick stint in the WWF. The Natural was a no-nonsense Texas boy, cowboy boots, country music, that kind of stuff. Maybe a little generic nowadays, but a gimmick that still resonated with certain fans back in the early 90s. So you can imagine how shocked these fans were when the Natural disappeared, only to re-emerge as Goldust in the WWF. It was a pretty extreme gimmick change. Dusty passed away in the summer of 2015 while Goldust was on the WWE roster, and almost 2 years later, the company decided to revive the Starrcade name for a house show happening in the Greensboro Coliseum. Starrcade itself was a Dusty Rhodes creation, as confirmed by Cody Rhodes when Dave Meltzer got a little big for his boots on Twitter, but Cody also gave credit to promoter Jim Crockett, obviously, and Nature Boy Ric Flair. The WWE version of Starrcade in 2017 wasn't even televised, it was a glorified house show, but at this show, Dustin paid tribute to his dad by reviving the Natural gimmick when working a match against Dash Wilder. Dustin took his old Goldust coat off, the Natural WCW theme played in the Coliseum, and the revival of this old gimmick did get a great reaction from the audience. Dustin explained that he got very emotional and nervous before making his entrance. He also fully admitted that the Natural theme song was a, quote, hideous, awful piece of music, but what he took away from his short match were the smiles he saw in the audience, and it reminded him how lucky he was to be part of the Rhodes family. Sean Waltman got his WWF career kickstarted when he competed as the 1-2-3 Kid. The name itself came from the fact that he pinned Razor Ramon in a surprise victory on an episode of Monday Night Raw, and the fans would taunt Razor by chanting 1-2-3. Waltman adopted the name, he became a fan favourite, and the 1-2-3 Kid would compete in the WWF from 93 to early 96. Kid would jump over to WCW where he was renamed Six, the sixth member of the New World Order faction who had a whole different attitude, and then, when returning to the WWF in 1998, Waltman was known as X-Pac. This name derived from the fact that Waltman was now part of D-Generation X, and also because he was often referred to as Six-Pac when part of the NWO. Throughout the remainder of his WWF run, Waltman was known as X-Pac. This name carried on when DX broke up, when Waltman formed the X Factor stable, and even when the NWO reunited in the WWF. And still to this day, fans will instantly think of the name X-Pac when they see Sean Waltman. The 1-2-3 Kid and Six names usually come secondary. While working for Shakara in 2011, Waltman brought back the 1-2-3 Kid name, which was a nice little throwback. And during his short stint in Shakara, the 1-2-3 Kid was able to wrestle the likes of Amazing Red, the Great Sasuke, and he even had a singles match against El Generico. I wonder whatever happened to that guy. Now, this was more of a quick name change rather than a gimmick or character change. It's not like Waltman didn't pull off Bronco Busters while working as the 1-2-3 Kid in Shakara or anything, but it's still pretty cool that he brought back his own name from the WWF's New Generation era, an era that wasn't nearly as successful as the Attitude Era and beyond, where Waltman competed as X-Pac. A bit of an oddity, this one. Jeff Jarrett arrived at the WWF as Double J Jeff Jarrett, a wrestler who was obsessed with country music. Musical gimmicks were nothing new in the WWF, and others have had success with it in the past, most notably the Honky Tonk Man. And Double J kind of fell into the same category as Honky Tonk when you consider how he competed as a bad guy, and how his favourite genre of music was all that really mattered to the character. That and winning the Intercontinental Belt, of course. When Double J left the WWF in 1996, he appeared in WCW wearing the same ridiculous outfit and coming out to some generic country entrance music, but he did have a little more direction this time around. He wanted to become a member of the Four Horsemen, and so a storyline developed between Jarrett, Ric Flair, Steve McMichael, and Steve's wife Deborah. Jeff would end up returning to the WWF in 1997, and his whole outlook on pro wrestling had totally changed. It changed so much that Jeff actually became pretty interesting, and it looked like he was maybe getting prepared for a main event run after cutting a work shoot promo in the middle of the ring. Jeff ripped into WCW, he ripped into Eric Bischoff and the lack of opportunities he received while working under Bischoff. He said there was nothing for him in WCW because he wasn't one of Eric's boys, but Vince McMahon didn't get off lightly either. McMahon's vision for Jeff Jarrett, that country music gimmick that Vince rustled up, well, Jeff said it sucked. Jarrett accused Vince of trying to bury him, but that's not going to happen the second time around. This is a new Jeff Jarrett who will pack his bags and walk out the door again if he doesn't get his way. Jarrett would then become part of Jim Cornette's NWA stable. He became all about the tradition and legacy of pro wrestling while also holding the NWA North American Championship. But then, 5 months after his WWF run, Jarrett would bring back his country music gimmick while introducing Tennessee Lee as his new manager. This was really weird, seeing as Jeff had ripped the gimmick apart during his return, and this change of heart from Jeff had seemingly came from nowhere. When Creative told Jeff to bring his old Double J gear to TV, Jeff wasn't expecting it at all, but Jeff also admits to being what he calls a delusional optimist. He saw the return of Double J being more like an anti-attitude era gimmick, but it did catch him off guard and all he could do was try to make the most of it. The Double J character did evolve as 1998 progressed though, and by the time he got his haircut at SummerSlam that year, the character had completely changed. But bringing back the Double J country singer electric cowboy gimmick, whatever the fuck it was, it did make Jeff look a little foolish, especially after his return promo in late 1997. Wrestling fans were introduced to Deborah Miceli when she appeared in the AWA as Medusa Miceli, having a rivalry with Sherry Martel and also managing the likes of Kurt Hennig and joining DDP's Diamond Exchange. After a trip to All Japan and a successful WCW run in 1991 to 1993, Deborah became the focal point of the WWF's recently reinstated women's division, which Deborah competed in as Alundra Blayze. Deborah owned the name Medusa. Vince didn't want to pay her extra to use the name, so Alundra Blayze was born, and while female wrestlers were few and far between in the WWF from 1993 to 1995, Blayze still quickly became a fan favourite. Many would remember her matches against Bull Nakano, Luna Vachon, and later on against Bertha Faye. Deborah stated she was let go from the WWF due to the financial issues the company were having at the time. She was released at the very end of 1995, a dark time for the WWF indeed, and when she returned to WCW as Medusa, she took the WWF's Women's Championship belt with her and she dumped it in a trash can. This act, an act that Medusa wasn't 100% behind but coaxed into by Eric Bischoff, would get her blacklisted from the WWF and she wouldn't appear on WWF television again for a very long time. WCW had the same problem the WWF had when it came to female competitors, as in they didn't have enough of them, and those they did have were only on loan from other organisations based in Japan. The new WCW Women's Championship belt was shelved after only a few months, and so Medusa found herself with no work for nearly 2 years. She was still paid by the company, but she didn't compete because there was no one for her to compete against. Soon enough though, Medusa was brought back. She became part of Team Madness and she would end up wrestling a limited amount of women and men. She had her last match at WCW Fall Brawl 2000, a scaffold match where she teamed up with Billy Kidman to take on Shane Douglas and Tori Wilson. When Vince McMahon bought WCW, Medusa decided she was going to step away from wrestling for good. This was due to the whole belt incident and because she wasn't satisfied with how women's wrestling was becoming more raunchy. And so Deborah said goodbye to wrestling forever, and that was that. In 2015, the WWE decided to induct Debra into the Hall of Fame under her Alundra Blayze name. During her speech, she retrieved the WWF Women's belt from the trash can, and she said the belt was now back home where it belonged. Then, in late 2018, it was announced that Alundra Blayze would return to the ring. She was going to compete in a Battle Royal match held at WWE Evolution, a women's only pay-per-view event. So fans got to see Debra revive her old gimmick for one night only, and she got a great ovation as she made her way down to the ring. Nia Jax would win the Battle Royal. Alundra unfortunately couldn't get the job done, but it is one of those returns that at one point in time you never thought it could have happened. It's almost silly bringing up Mick Foley in any video that concerns gimmicks because Mick made his whole wrestling persona centre around his multiple alter egos. You could point to multiple times when Dude Love made returns or when Mankind reared his ugly head again when storylines deemed it necessary. But the return of Cactus Jack, the first return of Jack when the character made his WWF debut, that one will always be special and it will always be my favourite. Long before Mankind debuted in the WWF, Mick Foley was known around the world as Cactus Jack. And while Jack really got his first big nationwide exposure while working for WCW during the mid-90s, it was Jack's time in Japan that made him sort of an underground mythical legend of pro wrestling. You see, Cactus Jack in WCW had a mean streak for sure, but he also found himself in some typical and not so typical wrestling storylines. He worked for WCW during a time when the company was trying to copy what the WWF were doing. And while fans knew Cactus Jack wasn't a dude you want to mess around with, and they knew Cactus wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty when it came to how he wrestled, he was still just another WCW guy who was trying to get himself noticed and a guy trying his best to better his standing within the company. Jack left WCW in 1994, and it was when he began working in ECW and Japan that the real legend of Cactus Jack was born. Foley became a hardcore legend thanks to the ridiculously violent matches he'd compete in, with the most infamous of these matches being held in the IWA Japan promotion in 1995. Cactus became king of the deathmatch, and news about Jack's insane matches spread among wrestling tape traders and fans who consider themselves a bit more in the know, so to speak. Many fans were introduced to Japanese death matches thanks to Mick Foley, and that's because these matches became part of pro wrestling lore. It was almost like a rite of passage to see these tapes, and fans who were only exposed to mainstream American wrestling companies quickly realised just how brutal and entertaining hardcore matches could really be. Mick Foley would then debut in the WWF as Mankind while still finishing up some dates in Japan working as Cactus Jack. Though when his commitments were all wrapped up, it looked like Jack was now gone forever as the WWF gave Mick Foley a brand new character to sink his teeth into. Many others, in my opinion, couldn't make this work. Mankind and even the WCW version of Cactus Jack were two very different personas, but Mick Foley put everything he had into Mankind, and he did make it work. It worked so well actually that people wanted to learn more about the man behind the mask, and the WWF did a wonderful job in humanising Mankind with a series of sit-down interviews with Jim Ross. Mankind was defeated by Triple H in the 1997 King of the Ring finals, and from here, Mick would start a rivalry with Hunter that turned out to be one of Mick's finest. The game and Mick Foley had some incredible matches over the years, and they both complemented each other when working inside the ring. But Triple H didn't always wrestle Mankind. As a matter of fact, it was Triple H who forced Mick Foley to bring back Cactus Jack because Foley felt he needed an extra edge when fighting Hunter in Madison Square Garden. On September 22, 1997, Mankind was scheduled to face Triple H in a Falls Count Anywhere match, and Triple H thought at first he was going to face Dude Love, a persona that only debuted in WWF a few weeks before this matchup. Dude Love appeared on the screen. He said Falls Count Anywhere matches really aren't his thing, and so Mankind showed up to talk with Dude Love, and Mankind said he knows someone who dreams about ripping Triple H apart even more than Mankind himself, and his name is Cactus Jack. Dude Love thought Cactus was dead. Mankind said no, he's alive and well. And when Cactus walked out to the arena, Jim Ross didn't mention anything Jack did in WCW. Instead, he focused on Cactus being obsessed with barbed wire, how Jack's wrestled on a bed of nails, and how he set himself on fire. The fans knew who Cactus was, of course. They chanted Jack's name and they chanted ECW, and Cactus would beat Triple H here after a piledriver through a table. Jack became a mainstay on WWF television, eventually teaming up with his old deathmatch rival Terry Funk before retiring the gimmick for another little while. And then, in early 2000, Cactus was brought back again for a couple of matches against Triple H. Big Daddy Cool Diesel made a name for himself by winning the WWF Championship in late 1994, and in 1995, for better or for worse, the WWF ran on Diesel power. While Diesel's run has been scrutinised quite a bit, and while sometimes he wasn't necessarily paired up with great opponents, I still always liked Diesel just for how he carried himself. He definitely had a great look, and in comparison to the cartoony characters the WWF were presenting during this era, he came across as much more cool and much more real than the other nonsense that was being presented on WWF TV at the time. When Kevin Nash left the company in 1996, Diesel was no more. Well, no, Diesel still hung around, but that's a different story altogether. But Kevin Nash, the original Diesel, was set to embark on an industry-changing storyline that altered the course of pro wrestling forever. When you think about it, Kevin Nash becoming a founding father of the New World Order is probably much more of an achievement in comparison to winning the WWF Championship belt, seeing as the NWO completely changed how the big two major American wrestling companies conducted business. So it's not like dropping the Diesel name was a bad move or anything. As a matter of fact, the death of Diesel was one of the best things that ever happened to Kevin Nash. When Kevin made his WWF return in 2002, he came back simply as Kevin Nash. He was joined by his NWO teammates Scott Hall and Hulk Hogan, so it appeared that the WWF had absolutely no interest in bringing back Diesel or even Razor Ramon for that matter. Even when the NWO disbanded and when Kev made sporadic appearances moving forward, he still wrestled as just Kevin Nash, even as he came to the ring with an updated version of the old Diesel entrance music. Nostalgia is a powerful thing though, and that was proven as fact when Diesel did indeed return to the WWE. Kevin was a surprise entrant in the 2011 Royal Rumble, and he got one of, if not the, best pops of the night when he entered the Rumble at number 32. Unfortunately, Diesel only lasted around 3 minutes or so. He was eliminated by Wade Barrett, but the crowd reaction was very good, and the Diesel return landed Kevin a few more matches in the WWE later in the year. Granted though, he did work as Kevin Nash again during his late 2011 feud against Triple H. Old Glacier, old Frosty Balls himself. You guys love it when I talk about this guy. I'm not going to bore you with all the blood runs cold stuff again because you know the story, it's been done to death. It took the guy months to show up, and when he did show up, he slid into our hearts like the beautiful Sub-Zero ripoff he really was. Glacier sold his gear, his gimmick and his entrance to Kaz Hayashi and Ernest Miller. He was done with the gimmick and he would come back to WCW as Coach Buzz Stern. The coach was mainly featured on WCW Thunder, and in short, the gimmick was a flop. I never understood why they got rid of Glacier because even though he wasn't breaking out of the lower mid-card, he was still a unique and memorable character. I think WCW failed Glacier more than Ray Lloyd failed as a pro wrestler because still to this day, loads of people remember him in comparison to other low-card wrestlers who competed in WCW. The company just gave up on him when the Blood Runs Cold stuff didn't pan out, and they didn't invest any real meaningful time in Glacier when he turned heel. Coach Buzz Stern wasn't good. It felt more like a gimmick that belonged on WCW Worldwide. Ray was let go in November 99 as a cost-cutting measure, but then, during the Mayhem 2000 pay-per-view, that old familiar Blood Runs Cold video played again, the first time it was seen since 1996. This time, blood was gonna run colder. We were gonna see a new version of Glacier that was colder, I guess. And someone who got extremely excited about the return of Glacier was Norman Smiley. Norman's a Glacier superfan, you see. Turns out that this version of Glacier was a bit of an egomaniac. Instead of helping Norman out, he wanted to pose for photographs and talk to fans. He became a parody of himself, which is quite the feat when you remember that this is fucking Glacier. Glacier may have been back in WCW, but he didn't compete in a single match, and after only being back in the company for a very short time, he ended up leaving again just 6 weeks before the WWF buyout. It's a pretty bizarre return, though I wouldn't say it's all that surprising. WCW just couldn't get anything right at all during this time period. The red and yellow Hulk Hogan was pretty much the WWF personified during the 80s and early 90s. When folks back then thought of pro wrestling, they thought of Hulk Hogan ripping his Hulkamania shirt off and competing in his signature bright yellow trunks. As time went on and as wrestling fans of that era grew up, the old Hulkamania routine got a little tired. Hogan tried to keep that momentum going when he arrived at WCW, and even though it worked out fine at first, it didn't take long for fans to turn their backs on the real American. He still had a ridiculous amount of fans, he was still one of the most popular people in all of pro wrestling, but Hogan was getting booed when WCW visited certain markets, and in more general terms, wrestling itself was beginning to change. Society itself had already changed. Folks tuning into pro wrestling shows weren't so keen on some dude telling them to say their prayers while fighting the good fight. People were looking for cool alternatives that were a bit more hip and not so dated, and Hogan would eventually learn this. For all his faults, we can never say Hogan was a bad businessman, except for that time he shilled an unlicensed NES game and he promoted the Hulk Hogan Thunder Blender, but I digress. The NWO provided Hogan with that change he sorely needed. When Hogan turned bad and when Hogan started wearing the black and white, it got the wrestling world buzzing, and still to this day, Hogan's heel turn remains as arguably the greatest heel turn of all time. The NWO took off, the Hulkster didn't look back as he began this new chapter in his career, and things would have worked out if a little forward thinking was put into place. Turns out WCW didn't have a clue where to take the NWO or where the storyline should end. During the final days of the NWO Elite faction, or the Wolfpack Elite, whatever you want to call it, Hogan was already planning on turning babyface again. He knew the writing was on the wall. If you watch his matches against Ric Flair at Super Brawl 9 and Uncensored 99, you can see moments of the old Hogan just by the way he wrestled. He knew how to get the crowd cheering for him, and you don't have to be a genius to see what he was going for. An all too common scenario then played out after Hogan got injured, that being internal issues within the NWO. And after Hogan made his return and after he defeated Randy Savage for the world title, Hulk had a new enemy in Kevin Nash. On the August 9th, 1999 episode of Nitro, Hogan's son Nick, who Hogan referred to as Nitro Nick during this time period, wanted his dad to wear his old red and yellow gear again. Hulk brushed his kid off and he went out wearing his usual NWO stuff, but later on, during the main event match, Hulk came back out in the red and yellow and the fans went completely nuts. The old Hulk Hogan was back, brother. The plan seemed to work out well as Hulk went on to beat Kevin Nash at Road Wild 99. But then Vince Russo came along and Russo wanted Hogan to take some time off while younger stars got pushed in WCW. Hogan, Flair and Randy Savage were pretty much pushed out of WCW during Russo's initial run within the company. When Russo left, Hogan was swiftly brought back. The red and yellow continued to run wild, but then Russo came back and it all became a giant mess. I don't even think Hulk Hogan knew what he was supposed to be anymore. Still, the return of the red and yellow Hogan within WCW went down really well. One of the better moments the company produced during their downfall. Loads left out here for you guys to talk about in the comments. King Booker made a Royal Rumble return, Alex Wright came back for some Saturday Night Fever, Kane went corporate only to put his mask on again countless times, The Undertaker brought back the Deadman gimmick and he also revived the American Badass. We could go on here for quite some time. I hope you enjoyed this video everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for watching and please take care.
He's not on a team or a member of a gang. He's Cactus Jack, or better known as Mr. Bang Bang. He's not